So, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us at our second Publisher Live event. Today we're talking about data and, more importantly, how to turn it into cold, hard cash. For those who don't know me, I'm Martin Lane, one of the founders of Publisher, and joining me is Ben May, founder and managing director of technical agency The Code Co, and my Publisher co-founder. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Now, everything you read about publishing these days seems to have the word data in it, or it's telling you something data related you need to know or do. And from the conversations we're having with publishers, everyone seems to agree that data is the secret to future sustainability, but knowing what you need to do is very different from actually doing it well. So that's the reason we decided to put on today's event. We want to demystify data and give you some simple, practical steps to implement that will make a real difference to your business. We've certainly got two of the best people to help you on your data journey. So a big thank you to Simon Ferguson and Kate Cook for giving up their time this morning. No pressure, guys. Now we want this to be as interactive as possible, so please do ask questions of our speakers at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure you Zoom veterans will know there's a Q&A tab. So just pop your questions in there, not the chat box. If you want to chat with your friends, that's fine, but questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Now we'll be hearing from each speaker in turn, and there'll be the opportunity to ask questions at the end of each presentation. So have a think about those as we go through. Okay, on with the show. So I first had the pleasure of working with Simon Ferguson back in 2000 when he was my publisher, and I'm going to embarrass him by saying my publishing mentor at Travel Weekly in the UK. Since then, he's enjoyed an impressive career launching online media brand Travolution, leading a management buyout of the Travel Weekly group, heading up retail platform Travelport, and developing the travel industry's first e-commerce marketplace. He's now based in the US as the president of asset intelligence for Informa Group, where he's using data science to transform a traditional subscription business. Today, it will be explaining how you can collect and utilize different types of data and create new revenue generating products. Welcome, Simon, and over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Just check that you can see the slides okay.
We can, thank you.
So good evening for me. Good evening to everyone from Atlanta, Georgia. Thanks, Martin, for that great intro. That's the sort of intro that my father would have loved and my mother would have believed. Thank you, very kind. So my topic for you is, are you sitting on a gold mine of data? A little bit of background about me. I've worked in B2B publishing and media for most of my working life. I've worked for two of the big beasts in global B2B media, Reed Elsevier. I currently work for Informa. I've published across the whole range of channels, so events, information services, and data, and across many sectors, so technology, travel, hospitality, consumer care, lots of different sectors. As well as working for some of the big guys, I've also run an independent as well. I led a management buyout of an independent publishing business about 10 years ago. So what does all that mean? Well, it means that, you know, when I look back on my time in publishing, I have lots of battle scars. I think it's fair to say. When I joined Informa, having worked for the biggest B2B media company in the world, Reed Elsevier, and then coming to Informa, the sort of second biggest, felt a little bit like my second tour of Vietnam, shall we say. So delighted to be able to share some of those war stories and battle scars with you this morning. So let's talk about data, and I'm going to switch commodities actually, and not talk about data in terms of are you mining for gold, but data is the new oil is probably one of the big cliches that's out there at the moment. And what I think is interesting about that is oil in itself as a raw material is not really that valuable. It's really how you refine it and how you process it that gives it its value. And that's a good metaphor, I think, for data in a media context. It's how you aggregate, how you curate, how you structure and normalize actually that gives data its value. You know, Martin touched on why is everyone talking about data? And well, I think that's easy to understand. If you look at the last year, these are some figures from Outsell, who monitor B2B media revenue streams. If you look at the big three revenue streams you traditionally have in the publishing landscape. Information services, so that's news, traditional content, often driven by advertising and marketing spend, events, and then specialist data. Well, not surprisingly, in the last year, information services and events have declined dramatically. They're inherently cyclical. Information services, interestingly enough, has always been cyclical, but also I think fundamentally digital, structurally challenged information services in a way that I think we're still trying to get our heads around in the publishing world. So, news, people struggle to charge for news is the reality. Now, some people do successfully charge for news, and well done to them, but you always have that pressure of this expectation that news and analysis content should be free, and being driven by marketing spend, that's a pretty cyclical revenue stream. Events, I think, at Informa, we are the world's largest hoster of trade shows and conferences, and I think we all thought that events were bulletproof. I think in the economic good times from the last downturn to 2008 and 2009, we've had such a big run of economic success that publishers were making money out of events hand over fist. And when COVID hit us last year, I think we'd forgotten that events are inherently cyclical. They work very well in the good times, but when you have downturns, they do get impacted. 2/3 of our business worldwide at Informa is events. Clearly, it's very challenged at the moment, but it is forcing us to think about how you create a mixed digital and physical events model going forward. Our view is that at least 30% of our revenue in the event space has to be digital going forward. We've had to adapt to that in the course of the last year, and I think that's here to stay. And then you come to specialist data. Specialist data is the revenue stream that for us and for generally in the marketplace has stayed stable throughout this crazy last 12 months, but also it's grown. Outsell reckon that specialist data businesses are growing at about 5% per annum. I'll tell you, in Informa, we have about $250,000 worth of specialist data businesses. We have them in pharmaceuticals, in finance, in construction and transportation, which is what I run, and we have them in maritime and shipping. All of those businesses are growing at about that 5% per year. My business grew 5% last year. I think it'll grow about 7% next year. And why is that? It's because fundamentally specialist data is sticky. If specialist data can help people to do their jobs better, there is much more reticence to remove that, even in bad times. And also the kind of titanic tectonic shift in terms of digital that happened to information services actually benefited specialist data. Many of the B2B data businesses that are very successful today started life as print directories. And when the web came along, they moved very easily, very simply. It was very easy to move those. When you were publishing print directories, you could never get over the fact that some clever guy would hold a directory in his hand for like 2 or 3 years and not renew. Whereas in the digital environment, you can automatically cut people off. You can play around with the subscription models a lot more easily. So there's a lot of reasons why people want to get into data. And then you've got at the bottom here the underlying information landscape. IBM saying that 2/3 of the world's data that has ever been consumed was created in the last 2 years. You think about the advance of digital capabilities, Amazon Web Services, how cheap it is to create good digital infrastructure now, how easy it is to scrape data, to store it, in a way which it hasn't been able to have been done before. And as a result of that, the multiples for specialist data businesses in the B2B media world, I can tell you, are exponential. There's a lot of venture capital coming into the market at the moment, really want to try to get their hands on data businesses because of the reasons I've said, because they're inherently sticky, they're resilient in downtime. And this merging of data and technology, which is a fascinating topic, really is one which is giving the investment community a great deal of appetite to invest in data businesses. So let's take a little bit more of a deeper look at what do we actually mean by data businesses. And I always like to think about the B2B publishing world with this kind of value map. Fundamentally, what you're doing as a publisher in the B2B world is, it doesn't matter what your sector is. It doesn't matter if it's commercial property or architects or IT directors. It doesn't matter. You're trying to put yourself in the center of that community. And in simple terms, you can generate revenue from that sector and generate audience in two ways. At the top of the slide here, we've got connecting. So connecting either through events or through information services models. And then down at the bottom, you've got the data models, which I've divided into insights and workflow. And I'll talk about those in some detail. And this is not, it's a little bit of a mixed model here, but generally over the left hand of the slide here, you're talking about streams which generally the user is paying for. And over on the right hand side, you're talking about models which in general terms often suppliers are paying for. So I always find this map a good way of just rooting myself in how we talk about the various publishing revenue streams. And we're going to focus on the two at the bottom here, the data revenue streams, insights and workflow. So again, breaking this down a little bit further, I like to think about data models as starting off on the right-hand side here, talking about insights, having insights into a particular marketplace. And then as we go towards the left, we get a little bit more towards more specialist, more utilitarian data and the models that you can apply to be able to collect and generate and monetize that data change. So let's have a little whiz around this universe. So over on the right hand side, when we're talking about insights data models, we're talking about traditional research businesses, often the likes of IHS Markit, who are very, very big, who are a generalist, who will publish research reports into a number of different sectors. They'll charge a subscription fee for them. In Informa, we have a number of these specialist research businesses. Omedia, that's down the bottom there, that's a technology research place. So we focus on the technology sector and we produce a number of research reports which we sell on subscription, but we'll also monetize those sometimes with sponsorship. And some of those models are general, but some of those are focused on a very specific marketplace. And right at the right-hand side here, a very simple way of utilizing and starting to get into the data space is just to do some very basic industry market sizing. I've got two examples. On the left-hand side here, this is the leading business travel media brand in the UK, and they take the largest business travel agents in the market and simply profile them. So they look at who's number one, who's number 50, how much revenue are they turning over, and they provide some interesting data analytics around who's going up and who's going down. On the right-hand side, a very similar thing in the construction space. So this is a US publisher who profile the large construction contractors in the US. Again, they're ranking them and they're looking at who's moving up, who's going down, what's the mix of their business. This is pretty light from a data perspective because you can produce this with traditional journalistic teams, but these are often very impactful. Everyone, I find, in whatever market loves to see the industry profile. They love to see who's moving up, who's moving down, and particularly ancillary companies, finance companies who are interested in a particular sector will often pay great attention to this. So if you're really taking your first step into data, I would advise do some of this profiling market sizing content. It's a great way of getting dipping your toe into the data space. It's relatively easy to produce, and it can have quite a lot of impact. Moving into that sort of research provider space, I've picked out a company called Focusrite here. They're based in the US. They focus on the leisure travel space. So this is a vertical industry play. They've got analysts. They're producing a number of research reports per year, and they're selling those on subscription, and they have different models. There's an open access model where you can buy everything they produce, or you can buy just a report. And they really use these as a driver for their events business, which is where a lot of their revenue comes from. So a mixed research and events business here. I tried to buy this business about 15 years ago. They were turning over about $6 million per annum then. So pretty respectable. And a way that you can look a vertical space and you take a traditional research production methodology and create some impact in the marketplace. Now, as we move along that arrow that I showed before, from insights over towards more complex data products, we get to the next one, which is what I've called forecasting. So this is a data model where you are collecting data, and what you are doing here is you are analyzing and presenting data that interrogates the currency of your particular market. And what that currency is will differ from market to market. The example I've got here is a global business called ISIS. So they collect data on the pricing of commodities worldwide, chemicals, oil, plastics, and they analyze those very carefully. And commodity buyers and manufacturers will subscribe to this data to understand the pricing of those commodities and how ISIS is forecasting that they're going to change over a period of time. They use a human pool of analysts here to do this forecasting. So it's proprietary observation added to this quite intense commodity data which they're collecting. So this is a little bit more specialist. This is using a bunch of data analysts to collect the currency in a particular market and then allowing customers to be able to use that in their forecasting and their commercial calculations. Another example of this is a great data model called WGSN. They do a very similar thing to ISIS, but their currency is not actually commodities or actually physical product. It's design trends. So what they're doing is they are going out to a panel of designers worldwide and asking them, what are you thinking about producing? Which colors are hot in the fashion sense? And they collect all that together. And they used what's commonly known as crowdsourced data. So the users contribute to the system. You aggregate it, normalize it, and sell it back to them. It's a very, very powerful model. So when I talk about what's the currency of your marketplace, that doesn't necessarily mean like a hard currency product. It could be a method of data in your marketplace. I remember when I published in the travel sector, we had a data product which ranked hotels by kind of professional inspection, and completely by accident there, we discovered that there wasn't a way of unifying, identifying hotels by unifying code worldwide, because a hotelier in Spain calls their hotel something different to Booking.com who are using it in the US. So we created a numeric code which just was a global identifier for hotels, and that became the currency in the marketplace. Very, very powerful. So if you can find what is the currency that the marketplace needs in order to be able to transact, that's pretty powerful. Moving on to workflow data products. So these are subscription-based data businesses, and these are used by specific individuals to perform their job. So an example here is one of our Informa businesses at the top here, Lloyd's Intelligence. They monitor global ship movements. That's simply what they do. So if you want to know where any cargo ship in the world is, you subscribe to Lloyd's List Intelligence and it will tell you. So this is used by manufacturers, by anyone who's shipping goods, anyone who needs to know where a particular ship is at a particular period of time. At the bottom here, this is one of my businesses, Equipment Watch. We collect data on construction equipment, heavy construction equipment. How much does it cost to own? How much does it cost to operate? And we sell that into equipment managers within construction firms. So this data is pretty specialist, and it's very oriented around a particular workflow. As an equipment manager, I need this data to do my job. As a shipping manager, I need this data. I need to know where this ship is. And it's that utility and that essential nature that gives these workflow data businesses their real stickiness. One of the things you have to accept and realize as a publisher, I think, is the news content and the analysis content that your journalists produce. That, I'm afraid, is not workflow critical data. Journalists might think it is, but guess what, it's not. I always used to say to my team, what happened if we stopped producing our news or article content tomorrow? What would happen? I'll tell you what, nothing would happen. The industry would carry on as normal. You might get a few emails saying, where's my daily news feed? But the industry would carry on. This sort of data, if we turned off this data for shipping companies or construction companies, the industry would stop. People will be on the phone to us saying, I can't do my job without this. So one of the ways for you determining, is your data a workflow data product, or is it just an insights or an information system product, is ask that question. If you turned it off, what would happen? Moving further down the kind of workflow route, you get to you get to compliance data. So again, this is data that's sold on subscription, but it's helping a particular industry with compliance. Acuity here is the global database for banks. It's where all the IBAN and the transactional numbers when banks are sending currency from one bank to another. This is kind of the global database where they go in order to check that they've got the information right and that there isn't any kind of fraud screening or going on. So it's a compliance tool. This is another one of my business at the bottom, Barber. What we do is we maintain a library of health and safety data, and we provide that to environmental and health and safety managers so they can check, am I compliant? You know, is my supplier in India, are they conforming to the sort of standards which I need them to comply to from a health and safety perspective? The interesting thing about this data is it's not unique. A lot of this data tends to be out there on the web, but the job that we do as publishers or data providers is we aggregate it together in one place and we put a structured taxonomy around it. So people could find all this data, the IBAN numbers, the health and safety data, but it would take them a crazy amount of time to do it. So it's an interesting case study, this data, where the data doesn't have to be unique. Sometimes your value can be structuring it, putting it into a taxonomy and just making it easier for people to get to. That's the refining analogy I was talking about earlier when we started off talking about oil. So some different models there. And as a publisher, the thing I would consider is, depending on which model you're going for, you will need some different resources, and you'll probably operate some different models. So I've compared the differences between a very specialist data business as a publisher and an information services business, traditional news and article content, etc. And you can see some of the differences. So a specialist data business tends to be subscription-based. Information services, well, it can be subscription-based, but often tends to be, you know, more marketing services based. It'll tend to be on the open web if it's information services. Specialist data businesses do live on the web, but generally behind a paywall. There'll often be a software as a service model, and you may well syndicate your data out. So as well as subscribers accessing your data, you may well integrate your data into the systems of banks or shipping companies or construction companies, so it's easier for them to be able to consume. Interestingly, when you look at information services businesses, they tend to have very high numbers of transient users. Data businesses, often you have a lot lower traffic because remember, you're going to often to specific job title people, but the number of pages consumed per user will often be very high because a shipping manager will go in and they'll get all the data they need for forecasting or to track ship movements. So a lot of page consumption with one user versus, you know, 4 or 5 pages typically from a transient user who's coming into a site via email. As we said, with data businesses, you're offering like a specific functional user. Workflow data businesses are fantastic, but the problem is they tend to get used by very specific functional people in the marketplace. Whereas, you know, information services, business news, and that sort of content, you tend to be able to get higher up in the food chain. The CEO, the CIO will consume that content. They won't necessarily consume the specific data-oriented business because, you know, they've got someone that they're paying to be able to do those specific jobs. Specialist data is often very utilitarian. You know, some of that data we looked at before, it's really hardcore, very specific data, but that's what makes it valuable. Information services obviously a lot more general. And when you look at the type of people you need to build and maintain data businesses, they are different. You know, you tend to be looking at data analysts rather than traditional journalists. There is a little bit of a mix in between those two models, but often you're needing market analysts, data analysts, people who understand the technical nature of data, and that's particularly true if you're delivering it through an API. And in the specialist data world, the database is king. And the taxonomy is king. That's the foundation for your product. Where in information services, it tends to be the CMS. So just some examples there of how the models, whilst it's all publishing, are a little bit different. So if you're looking to build a data team, you know, what does that look like? Well, you know, some of the things to think about, as I said previously, if you really want to go into starting to build one of those workflow or compliance or insights type businesses, you're probably going to need analysts or technical data people as opposed to traditionally journalists. You can externally source. There are lots of companies out there who can help you with your sourcing. Cloud Factory is just one that we use at Informa. They will go out and do the heavy lifting in data for you. So they'll go out and scrape open websites. They'll bring it back into a particular taxonomy. You don't need hundreds of people to do that. There's plenty of web companies who are out there to do that. Data science, we'll talk about this in a minute. This is a very big emerging area. So there's lots of companies out there. Data Robot is but one. We use a lot of Indian companies actually because they are able to produce incredible data scientists, very, very high level mathematics graduates at a very low cost base. And they will start to do predictive analytics with your data. Data science in itself is not the answer. You still need to give them direction about your marketplace, about what it is that's driving things in your marketplace. But data science for sure is a very growing area. And then you have data aggregators. I've just given one example, Battlefin. So they will take your data or take some content that you've got and start to put it into a structure and help you get it into some of the different places in which data is sitting these days. I won't spend a great deal of time on this for time, but pricing models, data models, closed user data models, it's pretty much a traditional subscription marketing ploy you're taking here. All of the general principles in subscription model tend to apply here. So typically you're providing data on a user license model. You might provide discounts for multiple users in a subscription. You can be creative with the term. You can give a new subscriber a 14-month term rather than a 12-month term. You can give them a free period if you want. I tend to try and stay away from that because I think if it's valuable, it's valuable. Auto renewal is very commonplace in the data world. And generally, as with anything that we subscribe to as consumers, it's generally worthwhile discounting new users because once you get them hooked with a specialist data business, it's difficult to get them out. The one thing I would say on pricing is keep it simple, make it easy for people to be able to access and really heighten the perceived value. My current business in the construction space, when I came in, we had 14 different pricing models, and it was just really, really, really confusing. So we've now simplified that down to 3 now. And you can practice with bundling, so you can bundle, event or article content into a data product to give it more perceived value. All of those are tricks and tips which you can use. So I want to finish before handing over to Kate with just a little bit on the sort of direction of travel for data. I think we're moving in a very interesting world at the moment where the dividing lines between data and technology are very blurred. All of those successful businesses that I talked to you about in the data space, they are still in some senses traditional publishing businesses. They do have proprietary specialist data. They've got rid of their print cycle and they've moved to a digital delivery. But in some ways, they still work as businesses that have a print cycle. They update data, weekly or monthly or quarterly. But the data can be quite static. And they're using traditional channels. Where we're going is definitely a world where customers are expecting data to be much more dynamic and much more predictive. And you can, with the power of AI, start to become predictive. I'll give you one simple example. We track, again, very utilitarian, we track crash and safety data for trucks that drive around the US. And we sell this to insurance companies, we sell it to finance companies. So we're now using AI to start to predict where could an accident happen. Because if an insurance company knows that, they can raise their premium for that part of the US, lower it elsewhere. Just a very simple example of how static data, when you start to apply predictive modeling to it, can start to become quite interesting and forward-looking. And that's where you start to need data scientists to do that, as opposed to just traditional data analysts or journalists. And just when you think this space is getting really interesting, it always gets interesting when Amazon get involved. And Amazon have now launched, they launched at the end of 2019, what they called, it's part of the AWS, the Amazon Web Services business, the Amazon Data Exchange. So if you have data, let's say I'm just going to take a completely random example. You have a publishing business that serves architects. I'm just going to make that up. And you've got, as part of your data offering, a library of architects' designs. What you can now do is put that data out on the Amazon Data Exchange, and people can buy that data exactly the same way they would buy anything else from Amazon. It's pretty powerful because one of the interesting things about data businesses is you never quite know who's going to want your data. You think it's the obvious people. So, you know, my core business is construction data business. So I think contractors want that. But I'm always getting calls from hedge funds, research companies, commodity brokers, people who are using my data to kind of make some observations about some other things. And that's where I think this could be really powerful. Because if you put it out on Amazon, who knows who might want to buy that data from you? And as you can see from the sectors in the bottom right-hand side, this is not a consumer play. You know, these are B2B sectors here that Amazon is enabling you as a publisher to put your data into their infrastructure. And this is just an example of the Amazon marketplace. So you literally go onto Amazon and someone here has decided to put their food delivery email receipt data into a database. And now it's available on Amazon Web Services. And they can charge for it or not charge for it. And you know, you can see that on the second one, you know, for a 12-month subscription, they are planning to charge $30,000 for that data. So just very interesting how, you know, if you can start to ultimately understand what we talked about earlier, what am I really trying to provide in my marketplace, and what's the data that's valuable in my marketplace? There are many interesting ways to be able to monetize that going forward, apart from you being the primary provider. So I'm going to finish with some summary principles for you, really. The image I would hold in your minds is that top diagram there. Is when you talk about data, what do you really mean? You know, are you just talking about, you know, market sizing, you know, lighter inserts data? Are you talking about a more sophisticated research offering? Are you talking about forecast data, workflow data, or compliance? And we talked about some of the differences between those. So if you're a publisher sitting in the center of your market, where do you sit in the value map? You know, what could you provide for your marketplace? What would the currency be that you could provide? Specialist is key. It's some of the most boring and functional and utilitarian data that is the most valuable, because customers, whether they're contractors or airlines, or it doesn't matter who they are, they don't have the ability to bring that all together, put it into a taxonomy, and make it searchable across one database, which is fundamentally, as a data publisher, what you're doing. So aggregation and taxonomy can be as valuable as actually unique data in itself. You might be providing that sort of value rather than just providing, you know, a very proprietary specialist data that you've created yourself. As we talked about, think about the capabilities you'll need on your team, and definitely use external partners. You don't have to do it all yourself today, absolutely not. And the final thing I'd advise is just focus. It's very tempting, particularly as a small to medium-sized publisher, to try and do everything. You know, let's do some events, let's do some awards, let's launch a new podcast, and you know, I think being very focused in the data space is important, because you know, you're looking for that nugget of gold, which is where we will come back to the gold mine, which could be something very utilitarian, could be something very functional. But if you focus on that and find value in that, then actually, you know, once you start to get a subscription revenue going off the back of that, very valuable. No need to dip your toe into lots of different pools. So in summary, I will say, I hope that was useful. My contact details are here. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. That was a bit of a whirlwind of the data world from a B2B media perspective, but please feel free to reach out to me or through Publisher. And as you look for that particular currency that's going to light your market up, happy mining, happy refining. Thank you.